through that. That'll just be what happens.
It goes through.
Yeah,
Oh,
through.
good.
If we're at least going through.
Yeah, if we're going through that, then we're rock stars. That's fine.
Is that close enough or does it
No.
Oh,
roll over.
typically, yeah.
Do my little roll.
If it was a long enough
Chair
word.
moves. Yeah, it's fine. The chair moves.
I'm comfortable with that, I guess.
No.
Alright, yeah, we're gonna.
I have my.
Thank
Oh
you.
yeah, no, I got my like sexy.
Sorry, this was my favorite word in English.
Bob.
That and timey.
So, do you have a preference between? Oh, well, yours wasn't itchy, right?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Have you been?
Kind of a
Right.
Yeah.
Bring two were coming out. It's there.
So the way
Are
this
you going
works,
to the? Do you
I'll
put in your money for the? Do you already hire
I'll briefly introduce all three of you,
Oh,
and
I
a more
was supposed
detailed
to
introduction for you.
I was
And
I mean, like they've already each crowdfunded you within a single day. Can you believe that?
Yeah, no, it was.
50K was only one day.
There's little signs. Actually, can you possibly do the?
Yeah.
You think that's gonna happen?
Yeah. I'm going to rent one grant that's $20,000.
And I'm just gonna test how it does.
Wow.
So I think they're gonna make it, and it'll be really great.
What is he gonna do with the castle?
So they're gonna just rent it out with residents. Make sure we can like walks there whenever they want.
Well, that's great because you rent it out, then you have your associate funds.
Will you mind if it's this low?
The money
We'll
is
just
not funds for paying for everybody to do these renovations. It's actually less than $1 million per castle.
Yeah.
It's in the middle of Poland.
Yeah.
But they need to fix stuff that's broken.
Yeah, sure.
But then like,
How big is it, do you know?
it's tremendous. It's ridiculous.
Really? It's an actual huge one.
Yeah, it's right there. It's right like it's got like what is it like 100 rooms more than that? Yeah.
Are you fucking kidding me?
No.
I figured it was like maybe like when we thought castle like maybe 20 rooms.
It's got these gorgeous archways and like palisades and silly amounts of stuff.
Really? And you only get this for less than
Yeah, there's one in France that's like $250,000, but the taxes that are bankrupted them in a year. So it's really different. Like, but yeah, there's some interesting stuff going on over there. Let's keep selling it. Just come to Poland and rent large here. You can make money.
If I keep the airplane money.
Sure, I'll just live out of somebody's like backyard for a while. Me in your wheelchair trying to go up the hills in Poland.
Yeah. So you're definitely going next year, huh? This year.
It depends on if I got money, man. I mean, like, the worst part is I can afford the tickets to the parks. I can't afford the $1,500 flights.
I'll be the one that
Is
gives
it
you
really?
the
You
time.
Poland?
To go to Poland, yeah, it's stupid. What's your name?
Danielle. Hi.
Danielle.
Oh, Danielle.
I feel like if you, so what you should do is you should fly to like the cheapest European country and then fly to Europe again.
Yeah.
Independently.
What I was going to do was I was supposed to go last week. And I was going to be 2 weeks ago. And I was going to be at Inside Hamlet. And then I was going to just couch surf for like 3 weeks. Go to Festival. And then go to College of Wizardry. And I was going to be there for like 5 weeks. I just couldn't get the money together because right now I'm super broke.
Yeah.
So, but next year they're like, you can come here for like however long you want. You can live on our couches. We don't care. Like, so I mean, it's kind of awesome. I would love to spend more time with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we'll see.
I mean, I want to do it too, but I have to both myself and Lydia are going to. I mean, she's coming with me to India. We've got other things we've got.
You got stuff going.
Yeah, it's very busy. I can't fit it into my travel plans. I really wanted to.
If I don't get a job, I will go to Europe and just backpack through LARPs just until I do anything else. Really fun. Alright, part my stuff. Please don't break the computer. Say
What's your name again?
Danielle.
Danielle.
This thing is the craziest.
Ajay. AJ. Nice to meet you. Are you from England?
I'm not. Actually, I'm
Oh yeah,
the team, but
So with Michael.
yes.
We were talking a little bit, and he's like a lot of the organizing team is not from the area, which surprised me.
Yeah, that's
I mean, so have you gotten to meet Sarah yet? Sarah is the founder.
I'm gonna sort of also try not to feel awkward that I'm in front of your slides. Just smile.
Am
I blocking
So we should
anything?
get going. Hold you guys up.
I'm in front of every
You
slide.
guys are all in touch.
I no longer smile. So right now I'm working.
I like your thicker.
And you like
Thank
the
you.
program.
This actually came
And
because
you like the program clearly.
Everybody
Yeah.
had the same looking
I like the
laptop,
people there.
and I was like, I'm gonna use my laptop
Great, it's a
with
great
like everybody else. So I
Well,
had
what
to.
about you?
So I got a custom one
here?
No, I'm in New Jersey. I'm director of operations for a nonprofit.
Alright.
I mean, and a lot of things, but I guess she's on
You can make your
a
own. Like I picked for you.
Get seated and everything. Thanks. Alright. So, welcome to the Who's at the Table, Who's in the Game perspectives on diversity and lack thereof in game representation and development panel. That's a mouthful. We have three awesome panelists for you guys. We have Sande Chen here, Shoshana Kessock, sorry, and Andrea Morales, who will be giving our first talk. And I'm gonna do it here. Andrea Morales is a strategic designer interested in how games' systematic impact is shaped by distribution chain. She is pursuing an MFA in transdisciplinary design at Parsons. Before coming to New York, she worked as a marketer and transmedia creator for the international brand and helped found the First Interaction Design Graduate School in Central America. She wishes to bring design thinking and service design to game industry as part of her efforts to explore the middle ground between the virtual and the AFK. That's away from people. So, without further ado, Andrea Morales.
Thank you. So yeah, like AJ was saying, my name is Andrea. I'm going to talk about my current project, which is called Following the Green Light. That's a play of words on Steam, basically. You can find my email over there if anyone wants to email me, and that's also my Twitter, which apparently is a thing in this industry. And I'm going to talk basically about my strategic design project on the future of inclusive game distribution. So what do I mean by that, and what is this project all about? Basically, I'm trying to explore ways of in which game distribution can become adaptable to change, be more diverse, and be run by community consensus, all through the lens of strategic design. Now, usually I get really puzzled looks when I talk about strategic design, and that's totally fine. So actually, I'm going to talk a little bit about that first. So why strategic design? Well, I'm a student at Transdisciplinary Design in Parsons. This is an MFA. And I have a background in filmmaking and game design. Some of you might have heard about strategic design. There are several different definitions, but personally, I define it as using design methodologies as a way to tackle complex problems that can't be solved by a single discipline. That can involve anything from climate change, poverty, unemployment, community resilience in the face of change. These are, of course, huge problems that we can't solve by doing a single design intervention. So what we do is we try to gather different disciplines, for example, a game designer, an engineer, a nurse, and put them all together to think about these big issues. In my specific case, I chose game distribution as what I call my wicked or complex problem that can't be solved by a single person. And I pair that love for games and strategic design to make this project. The most important part about strategic design, though, and the reason I'm using it as a lens for my project, is not that I can use it as a methodology, but the fact that the outcomes of a strategic design process depend deeply on the way I frame that problem, on the way I frame a challenge. My solutions can go from anything like games to services to products or even experiences. And in the case of a problem that is so complex as distribution, it makes sense to use a lens as strategic design. In many ways, some people say that strategic design is solution agnostic. But some of you might still be wondering why exactly I chose this topic out of all the possible topics in strategic design. And I have a personal confession to make that will hopefully help you understand why I'm here, which is basically that I believe that games have the potential to seamlessly unveil the backdrop of technology for people, and specifically for underserved communities. What I mean by that is that nowadays we're always in constant interaction with technology, but games, I believe personally, have the potential to teach us how that technology works, and at the same time to help us become creators in a faster way. This is even more important in a world where more and more people are playing games, and be them pirated or not. And as Catherine Cross explained yesterday, games have become a reflection and at the same time shapers of our culture. So in that sense, what better way to make people become more empowered in their use of technology? So maybe what I'm trying to say is, if our future depends on the artificial anyways, if the survival of humanity, not to be very fatalistic, but, fatalist would be in English, fatalist, but at the end, with climate change, with poverty, with the difficulty of digital labor, we have a really hard situation on our hands. So if our future depends on our relationship with technology, how are we using games to create more inclusive futures, specifically in that technology? So with that understanding that games are paramount to our present and hopefully will even be more so in the future, I want to talk about framing, or how I'm envisioning the possible place of games in culture as a part of this project. These are some frames, of a video called Powers of 10 by Ray and Charles Eames, where they explain that problems look differently according to how you zoom in or zoom out, right? So you can see a problem from the point of view of an individual, or you can see a problem from the point of view of a country, or eventually even of the galaxy. And that changes the solution that you're going to create for that problem. So specifically, I want us to think about the proportion of our interest in games and our place in them, and how we're going from the macro or the micro with our practices as game designers or as players. And this specifically in the consumption of games. Now, why am I saying consumption and not play? It's precisely because I mean to ask a simple question. How are we designing games in the context of value chains, which is something we usually don't think about? So I've created a diagram to try to start testing out our knowledge in this context and what I mean by value chains. As you can see, we can more or less summarize the value chain of production in games as a cyclical process. It looks linear, but it starts again. I've made some slight changes here that I'm going to explain so that we can understand our place in this value chain. But basically what you can see is we usually talk about creators, people that are manufacturing, in more consumption-based terms, games, which are human labor, or, we have also talked about artistry in the sense that then once it is done, in some sense, is taken to be manufactured. So you take any materials you would need, which could be from electricity to internet connections, and then that gets distributed, be it mediated by publishers or not, so that it gets to a point of sale, which can be offline or online. Through marketing and sales, we actually get this into the hands of people, and then they circulate it amongst themselves until they throw it away in the case of something physical, or they just shelf it, right? So as you can see, when we've been talking about inclusion in games, we've been focusing mostly on 2 points specifically, which is the creation of games, which is completely fine, right? How many women creators, how many African American creators, how many disabled creators? We're always talking about that part. How can we get more people into the industry? And we've also been talking about what sort of content is a part of this, how are women being portrayed in games, right? What is marketing saying about games? But there are several important parts of this value chain that we are not currently talking about when we talk about inclusion. And I think that things, for example, like distribution, or how physical objects are manufactured, or what happens to games once we throw them away or shelf them digitally, aka your Steam backlist, right? What happens then, and how is that affecting distribution and inclusion? Inclusion. So out of those, why did I choose game distribution? Well, I chose it as a focus point because of my concern with 3 particular trends in the game industry that are related directly to its history, which we will see in a bit, and to an increased technocentric approach to games. The 3 trends that I see that are important are commoditization, virtualization, and centralization. What I mean by commoditization is everything that has to do with digital purchases, how value becomes lower or higher because of the digital purchasing of games, how price point changes with that, and what is sort of ritual of consumption of games, of playing with others, and how that has changed now that things become more commoditized in the digital. Then I'm also talking about virtualization in the sense of what are the digital gaps, who can access this virtual world, who can't, and how are we defining games in the context of technology? Specifically, why are we starting to talk about games as video games when it comes to distribution and Steam? And finally, one of the trends that worries me is centralization in the context of the other two. So how do we have big fish and little fish in distribution? Good old games versus Steam. How does that affect censorship in every sense, or not, right? How are these communities working as they wish? And how is circulation becoming monopolized by certain bigger fish than others? So when looking at inclusion in games beyond representation or depiction of underserved communities, and when framing this in the context of the future, of how games are going to be a sort of bridge to technology for underserved communities, could we create modes of circulation that are resilient in the long term, that are diverse enough to include dissident voices, and that can be run by community consensus? And what would that look like? That is my main question. What would that look like? To answer that, I created Following the Greenlight, as I said, a direct play of words on Steam Greenlight, to think about possible futures of game distribution. And the project has 3 phases that overlap: research, co-creation, and prototyping. These go back and forth. It's not linear. So now I'm going to show you what I've been doing in that context. So I've done mostly interviews with game developers and secondary research. Without going into a lot of details, the most important part of the research has been the way I, as a designer, have visualized what I call the landscape of the problem, aka the landscape of game distribution. And try to see, once I visualize it, try to see hidden connections or possibilities for innovation inside that problem. This is what I'm calling a historical conceptual map. So I'm going to show you. This is what I came up with. This is obviously coming from a lot of Post-its, as you can tell. That's what those are. And so after all my research, I started just rapidly brainstorming all of the terms I learned regarding game distribution, and then trying to organize them in a way that would allow me to see new things. So I'm going to zoom in. Don't worry about it too much. So one of the first things I did as part of this project was to look at game distribution all the way to physical games, and not only talking about video games. This meant, of course, that I would have to start thinking about whom were the first people that had access to games. And although physical games have, of course, been very accessible, because anyone can play them and teach them to anyone else, games have undergone a process of exportation and appropriation from country to country from very ancient times. Still, this process was very slow and depended heavily on infrastructure and technology, which is one of the first insights that I'm going to be talking about in a bit. For that same reason, many times elites had the first access to games precisely because they had faster transportation or were closer to cities. So, for example, you have Snakes and Ladders, which came originally from India, right? It was then exported, that's not the correct word, but it was then circulated all the way back to the United Kingdom, who appropriated it in a different way. But mostly it was people that were close to cities, ports, so that left out a lot of people that didn't have access to this game. And in that process, what you had was a mixing of ideology and religion in games and their worldviews, which is over there in that funnel. So in that same example of Snakes and Ladders, in India originally Snakes and Ladders referred to sins and virtues in life, and you just throw the dice and you get a result. And it's kind of like how life is you can't control it, but you get either a way higher into spirituality or not, depending on how you go through life. The interesting thing is that once this was taken by Christians to the United Kingdom, it ended up only including 10 sins and 10 virtues. In the Indian version, there were more sins. So the reason I'm mentioning this example is because that appropriation of games was faster and was easier to do for elites. But at least there was an appropriation that wasn't based on intellectual property. Eventually, this connection in the West, and bear with me with that concept for a moment, between religion and games became muddier as the concept of progress and capitalism was mixed with that, and games were starting to be seen as a waste of time or as a way towards sin, because sinning meant not doing something that produced something in society. So that also led to physical, infrastructural, economical, and even religious constraints that were set on the kinds of games that were being massively or as massively as possible produced. So we started getting excluded audiences, like I've told you about, right? One clear example of this is the first board games to be mass-produced that were printed in lithographies that were used to sell books. So in the sense, if you had access to a lithography, or where a man, let's say, to give a specific example, that wanted to sell a game, it was easier to do. Monopoly is a really good example, right? I suppose most of you know here, but it was originally created by a woman, and there was a lot to do with IP and women not having the access to these means of distribution. So this in itself, that access to distribution, set differences of literacy in playing games and determined what kinds of players could buy the game or even understand it, right? Not everyone had access to what a board game was. Later on, piracy, which is over there, upstairs, I call it informal distribution, because piracy, I don't know. Later on, piracy would be a direct reflection of this and a throwback to times when people with lower access would share games without concerns of IP, for example. So that's a very interesting thing. Tying this back into the physicality of games, it was clear that game objects themselves and the spaces of distribution could include or exclude entire communities. A clear example is the Xbox polemic surrounding the sharing of physical discs. So the game object itself we use to distribute, which can be a download, by the way, is important. This all ties into infrastructure, of course. I've told you about being close to ports, being close to trains, having access to being able to buy discs. All of that is also a very important part of distribution. Not everyone in the world has access to a fast enough connection, for example. And in the end, this ends up changing aspects of presentation, like are we doing bundles, are we doing early access, are we doing game of the year, modes of payment, is it direct, is it through the internet, is it with a credit card? Those things affect the way we create games and who can access them. And for example, the way co-creation works in this space is, can you co-create with someone that's around the world or not? So that has been changing through time. And this is just a small glimpse, right, into the historical factors that affect distribution. So all in all, this means that the conceptual map is a screenshot of how distribution works currently, but most importantly of the factors to be taken into account when talking about it, specifically for designers that are trying to create or see spaces for innovation in it. So it's not just about Steam, but it's also about digital gaps, language, physicality, even what a download is envisioned as by the players. And from that, what I could do, and I had to do because I'm a designer, was create insights. So insights, yeah, you can read them. Insights, I'm going to read them out loud, I just meant I don't know if you can see them. So insights are a way of seeing causality, even if it's not 100% correct yet, and I'm expecting that it's not because this was an individual process so far, right? But of seeing causality and connections between all of those different parts of my map. And I'm going to read them to you. What I extracted was that technology change is a vital part of keeping the industry alive because games are created around technology currently. So that's a big issue. In the face of a lack of resources, audiences take over distribution through appropriation. I'm talking about piracy, which I am completely fine with as long as more people get access to games, and we're going to talk about that later. Then I'm going to talk about how the area of payment hasn't been explored beyond changes in connectivity. So if I have a credit card, okay, payment changes. But mostly it is because payment is not questioned. So we're not questioning why we're paying for something or how we're paying for it. Except recently with humble bundles, which are changing that a little bit. How monopolies of distribution tend to be justified by the industry because of the ease of access for consumers. So we assume that the monopoly is the only way to actually get things to people, so we're fine with it. How bundling is seen only as a way to access money, not a larger community. How heavily concentrated business models are prone to crisis due to lack of resilience to technology changes. I'm talking about arcades specifically. How the visualization of distribution, specifically when referring to infrastructure, hasn't been done at all because we focus more on content than on the rest of the parts of distribution. How co-creation modes are not new, but the online is placing them as they are, like crowdfunding. How board games have followed paths of privilege from colonies to elites and back. And how physical distribution lower the barrier of appropriation and modification of games. So from that, I extracted 2 design criteria that I'm using to create a solution. By the way, this is a work in progress, so I'm not going to show a solution today. I'm actually going to invite you guys to be a part of this. But they're basically 2 axes. First, the online and the offline, and secondly, how concentrated or dispersed distribution is. And now, of course, I realize that I'm an individual. I don't have all the answers, so I do workshops. That's what I do as a strategic designer. That means that I'm going to get people to go through the same, not completely the same, but to at least conceptually go through the same way of thinking as I had to go through and get information from them that they can't even see the connections in. So what I do is I make it visible, I make it tangible, and then they make up their minds about what they see are trends in this. So the outcomes were basically that they gave me 2 new insights, which is that circulation is different from distribution, and perhaps more relevant as it involves the community directly. What I mean is distribution is where there's an exchange between a more official partner. Circulation is more like piracy, like when you give another person what you're doing and that's it. And then secondly, that players remember games as tech-related experiences because the industry does so too. So since we talk about so much about technology, they do so too. And when they talk about their history with games, it's always about technology and how they went from a console to a handheld to a, right? But they don't talk about how they play this with people, which was really interesting. Out of those, I found several ones that I think are more important, which, because I'm out of time, I'm not going to talk as much about. But the most important thing right now is that we need to find ways of making games be comfortable in a space between the offline and the online, and at the same time allow for discovery without monopolizing that discovery, which of course is quite a challenge. But those insights are really interesting for a possibility of ideas that could come out. So what are my next and final steps? Well, for this presentation, we're going to keep going with co-creation and prototyping. So I want to do 10 more interviews with experts, of which I have like 3 more scheduled so far, to talk with game developers that are beyond 30 years of age, or, you know, like to get developers that are really diverse. Then to do 3 more workshops, and I'm looking for participants. The first one I did had 15 people. I want to do workshops with 40 people, 50 people, because that perhaps not assures me, but gives me more diversity in points of views. And finally, I'm going to prototype, interesting part, which is when I grab all these insights, all this criteria, and create ideas of interventions for game distribution. So I'm going to do 3 rounds of that. They're going to be lean rounds of prototyping. So yeah, to end, if any of you want to participate, just send me an email. If you have questions, all of this is going to be online also, but you can talk to me too. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next up, we have Sande Chen. Danielle, can you help us set up?
Absolutely.
And while she's setting up, I'll let you guys know a little bit about Sande.
Yeah, you can make that there.
Sande Chen is a writer and a game designer whose work spanned over 10 years in the industry. Her credits include a 1999 IGF winner, Terminus, 2007 PC RPG of the Year, The Witcher, and Wizard 101. She's been profiled in Next Generation's list of game industry top 100 most influential women, and is the co-author of Serious Games, games that educate, train, and inform. She holds degrees from MIT, the London School of Economics, and the School of Cinematic Arts at the University of Southern California. So, she is going to give you guys an awesome talk right after she sets up.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Technical difficulties.
Yeah. Because I think that this is like TPI, not HTML. Because HTML is this one.
I do have it on the flash drive.
All right.
This is
Sure. Do you mind if we use your computer?
No.
Thank you.
Now that since we know that it works with the projector.
I have it off of mine, but yeah. It's me and demons. It's a bad one.
it's this side.
What side? It's very pretty, it's just a 30% chance it might work.
Do you have the
Holding your fingers, yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
I was gonna say, switch back on the
Should be fine
camera.
for now.
So,
Oh, I think that may.
wait,
There we go.
that,
Yeah.
wait. You should put it over the. Oh, it's a PowerPoint. I think it can read it, but I don't know if the format's gonna look okay.
Yeah, Pages usually opens them, but they can get wonky with formats.
And then I just press, what did I press to continue?
Yeah, the
Is
font's
it
wonky.
looking okay?
Oh,
No.
It's a little bit wonky, but it'll be okay.
Yeah, just this one.
So, just this one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously the title would be a lot larger. But we'll just deal with it.
Sorry about that.
Okay. I'm going to talk about female developers and female players and female characters and see if there's any kind of relationship between any of these parties. My name is Sande Chen. I've started about 15 years ago on large-scale RPGs for PC. And then I became a mobile producer working on these in very beginning of mobile games when there wasn't even pictures. And so we had black and white, and even when we got color, it was kind of rudimentary. But as I saw the whole casual game revolution, and I did work on bigger games on consoles and handhelds and MMOs and social games, and finally as a side interest on educational games as well. In 2005, a nonprofit that I started with Michelle Sorter, who's pictured in there, got nationwide notice because we brought attention to the issue of recruitment and retention of women in the game industry. It was a featured session at GDC 2005. There was a lot of interest in this topic. Around this time, Sherry Grainer Ray, a game designer, she had written this book called Gender Inclusive Game Design, Expanding the Market. And this book talked about this untapped market of female players that had different play patterns, had different habits and interests that game companies could possibly start to sell games to. And with that, we proposed as a nonprofit, Girls in Games, that if they were to hire more female game developers, maybe they could get into this market because of female players, get more female players, interest this market, this untapped. Basically, the part that they were ignoring was, at this time, was basically console games and large PC games, and indie games were very, very few, not distributed very much. And as for whether or not there would be more female characters, I don't know. That is a question mark. I don't know if there's been any studies on this hypothesis, but however, it was a good proposal and a good supposition because we did know that there were several studies about diversity in the workplace, and it does increase your bottom line for many, many reasons, right? Above all, it does increase your staff motivation because there are more diverse ideas, increases innovation. It does open up to different possibilities in different markets. Your workplace environment is better when you have a more even split in genders. So there's been a lot of evidence to this fact. This is from a study in 2003, but there have been several others. However, in hindsight, there are probably other hypotheses that we could have thought of, and it's sort of a chicken or egg sort of thing. And perhaps it is that there are female players, and now that they have access to tools to make games, that they could become female developers and having their own personal stories have female characters in them. This is certainly what we have seen in the indie film world, where female indie filmmakers do have more female protagonists than when compared to films overall. And we do see that there are more female protagonists in indie games than in what we would call the big mainstream games. Another hypothesis might be, if you build it, they'll come. If you got female characters, maybe that will interest the players. Maybe they will become so interested that they will become developers. But let's look at the data. All of this is mostly recent. So this is from 2014. I just picked two of the categories. As you can see down the bottom, we're having 5%, and I think for artists, women consist of 9%. That sounds pretty dismal. Last year, actually, I think in the artist category, women were around 16%. I've seen these surveys since 2007. I didn't dig it up, because they were in paper copies then. But you're about the same. I mean, we may have increased in percentage in producers. Women are generally in marketing, or they can be producers, and designers and programmers are really very small percentage. And so this is a percentage. The overall numbers may have increased because maybe the industry has increased as a whole. But say the whole available job pool, this is a percentage. So the percentage is a more interesting number to think about. But thinking about how they collect this data, this is self-reported. It's also mostly directed to attendees of GDC, so it could be that there's a lot of female subordinates who are like at home, and they don't get to go to GDC, and they're not going to report this, so you take it for what it is. But still, these numbers look kind of dismal, and if you look at the salary, the gender gap is alive and well. Definitely is there. So what does this say about what's going on in the industry here? So I think that when we wanted to say that increase of female workers or female employees would give you these diverse perspectives and increase your bottom line, it was because it was a dispassionate sort of based on the numbers kind of argument. If you were to say, oh, you're discriminatory or something, this would bring up topics of, quotas or things like that. And that's why sort of the argument was directed more towards numbers and statistics and so forth. In regards to characters, we definitely see that there's a demand for female characters. At last year's 2014, there was a year-long study on girls, and 60% of them, and this has been seen in other studies too, they prefer to play female characters, and yet those characters are not available for them. Just recently, in the Washington Post, a 12-year-old girl, she wrote an op-ed about not having a female character in her favorite mobile game app. And she went to look at the games that she played. 98% had a default boy character, and about half of them maybe had an option to get a female character, but you had to buy it. And so she was so outraged that she wrote this article. But most publishers point to this other study in 2012, and it has been some amount of years, but they still kind of point to it, that, and EDAR is a research tank in Europe, I believe, that games with male-only protagonists sold 75% better than ones that only have female protagonists. And one thing to note about this is that this study was about console games, and console games in the last 7 years, they don't have a lot of female protagonists, like 3%. I mean, I think it was like 24 out of about 700 games had a female lead character. Furthermore, the marketing budgets for female-led console games are significantly lower. They really don't expect anything much for it. They're not pushing it. They're not putting their marketing dollars behind it. So you can kind of expect that they're not going to sell as well. And yet, there's still this prevailing belief that games with female protagonists don't make money. This is like the death knell. If you got a female protagonist, it's not going to make money. And this is despite casual games, which is for always seem to have a female character. And that's because it was targeted to female players. And despite all of this, this is generally still a belief that you can't put a female character inside a game and have it be the lead. So the ESA publishes essential facts about the game industry each year. It's no mystery that, females are 50%, about 50%, and this has been consistent for several years, even before the casual game revolution. But a lot of game developers didn't really care because they said women play games, but they play web games and they play Slingo and they play all these stuff that don't really interest us. And so therefore, we get this assumption that females do not play video games, and this is obviously it's not true. But yet we have this assumption. And part of the issue is that some of these casual games, or even the gamers themselves, or the people who play casual games, don't consider themselves to be gamers. They would not self-identify themselves as gamers. So perhaps it is that females do not play video games that matter, at least to the powers that be, i.e., they don't play the video games that make money. It's not true when you look at the social games and casual games part, but that is part of the issue, is that perhaps this hardcore and casual divide is that females do not play real video games, meaning those hardcore console games, and they are not real gamers because of that. And therefore, we can totally ignore that there is this market where they are perfectly willing to pay money, and definitely people sustain themselves in New York City as casual game companies. And yet, I want you to think about these assumptions because they do pervade a lot of the attitudes that come forth. And so I'm going to have 3 more slides on some of the controversies that have arisen in the industry. So in 2012, Kixeye, and this is 2012, so maybe their hiring practices have changed, but they had a hiring video that basically insulted casual game players. And some people said it was sexist, and but they said that, we're a game company. We don't want to appeal to those casual game players. We've got games that are about epic sea battles with pirates. You know, this is you can see this sort of the assumption there. Hardcore gamers that are willing to pay up versus casual gamers or women players who are playing these casual games not willing to pay up. Although, you know, there is data that says that women players are total whale, what they call whales in the casual game industry. And yet we have sort of still those prevailing attitudes that, you know, the ones that are going to pay are the real gamers, right? So, you know, there's an implication that 35-year-old women aren't hardcore gamers. They're not interested in pirates, and they don't care about epic battles. So Remember Me is a game that they were discussing how they had some issues with publishers about their female lead protagonists. You can see there, again, there's this assumption that if you got a female lead, it's not going to make money, right? There's no way it will succeed. Secondly, there's the assumption that the player is going to be male. They wanted to have a love interest, and this issue of the player kissing a dude in the game, how that would feel awkward, is this a situation that they want to put forward. Actually, in the study that I referred to earlier, which is from GDC 2014, while girls prefer to play their gender, boys actually don't have that much of a problem playing an opposite gender. You know, it doesn't bother them as much. I mean, there are a certain percentage that do, but it's not 60% of them are going to be bothered that they are playing a female lead character. So the next slide has some language. If this bothers you, you can avert your eyes. This is a more recent controversy. This is about female Twitch streamers, and this is erupted on Twitter and elsewhere. Twitch is a place where you can stream your gameplay, you can talk, and you can be a personality, and those, there are some of the players, they are flashing their boobs or asking for money so that they can support their gaming habit. I think this brings the issue of like what is a real gamer and you know what is a girl gamer and what is a real gamer. I have a friend who doesn't want to identify as a girl gamer. She'd rather just be called a gamer because of these issues with, you know, she doesn't want to be associated with like someone who is probably not, you know, she doesn't want to be associated with this controversy because of this. And a lot of this is that, yes, they're playing hardcore games, but what is their reason for doing it? Is it just for money? Is it just, you know, attention? What is all of that? So I brought up a lot of these things, and, you know, I've talked about diversity at GDC like 10 years ago. And at GDC in 2014, 2015, still the same kind of talks are there. So in a way, I feel conflicted because I think that's you know, how we move forward. But at the same time, last year and maybe the year before, we have heard a lot of people speaking about issues, asking about playable female characters and insisting that there should be these characters and we should have more women in the industry, and talking about the sexualization of characters. I read an interview in the January issue of the WGA Written By magazine in which the lead writer said that the feminist frequency videos were a wake-up call. Apparently in the story development, they had an idea that there would be a zombie virus that would only attack women, right? And so the lead character would be the only uninfected female. However, they thought about this and said, well, it might seem misogynistic if you spent like a huge portion of the game mowing down zombies who were like women. So they really started to reevaluate how gameplay might seem, right? The other thing is that he said that I started reading about, the need for kids to have strong female role models, of which, I wrote an article on that as well. And he wanted to have this, create a non-sexualized, complex, strong female character who would be a role model. So I want to end this on a positive note that if you are writing about this, if you are concerned about it, then keep on doing it, because this is a company that had the weight and the reputation to go ahead and go forward with their plans. Yes, they got flack. Yes, people told them, you're not going to succeed with this female character. I mean, who's going to play it? And so, but they did it anyway, because they were influenced by all the discourse and all the discussion that was going forward on these issues. So I can be contacted. I wanted to put my Twitter early on, but this is me, and I have a blog, email, so this is how you can contact me. Thank you.
Oh, I got mine. I'm good. Hopefully.
Yeah, I think I'll
Please.
wait until it starts getting bigger.
Yeah. Then,
Introduce it here.
I just have to.
Oh, yeah.
If it works, yeah. Please, God. Let's hope. Because I have videos on here that are native to here, so I don't want to.
Do you have an HTML board?
I have the same one as this.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it should just be a matter of switching
Just
out
a plug.
computers.
Yep.
Yeah.
You should just be fine with that. Yes. This way. Don't die. All right. So, let's do this. Yeah.
Twitch videos
Yeah,
be available
please.
after, or those only for
Should
live
work, but it
stream?
takes a while.
They are recording.
Come on.
Alright, cool. Thank you. No problem.
Oh, please, it's working here.
There.
Yeah? Oh, right. You can see on my messy desktop for a second there, sorry. Cool, we good? All right.
Yeah, let me read your bit at least.
Sure.
All right. Shoshana Kessock is a writer, game designer, and scholar specializing in storytelling and narrative in multiple mediums. She is the co-founder of the Phoenix Outlaw Productions, an independent role-playing game design company, and the founder of the Living Games Conference, the first academic conference in the U.S. dedicated to live-action role-playing games. She is the author of such diverse games as Dresden Lives, Dangers Untold, The Last 10 Minutes, and Service, which was a 2014 IndieCade finalist. When she isn't writing and organizing games, she writes fiction, blogs about games, and media for various sites, and produces academic papers on role-playing games. I'll leave it to you.
Cool. Hi, guys. I'm going to start off by saying that this is the title of my talk, Invisible Bodies, the Erasure of Different Bodies in Games. What that specifically is is a large topic to cover, right, when talking about what bodies and what kind of physical forms we do not see in games. When I realized that I was going to be talking for 15 to 20 minutes, this had to become a much shorter talk. I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about what is considered body normativity in this world, okay? We're going to hit some really big topics and then go game. So I looked up definitions of what body normativity is and what normalism is for bodies, and I couldn't find a definition that I really liked, so I kind of made one myself. It might be problematic. Here's how we figured it out. So body normativity is bodies and forms which are considered within the range of normal for human beings in shape, size, age, gender conformity, overall appearance, and ability as depicted in and accepted by society at large. Society, of course, being a shifting thing depending on where you are and what you are perceiving. It can be a shifting definition of what normative is, however, especially when we're considering the Western society and the normatives that are associated by media of what bodies should and should not be. That's sort of what we're talking about today. This is a big topic that covers the intersection of multiple groups that have been underserved in games over the years. I know this, and that's why this could be a much larger talk when covering things like ageism, sexism, gender conformity to huge things. So we're going to be focusing on one today, which is near and dear to my heart, and that is the service or the actual non-service to the overweight community in digital games. And I'm focusing again on digital games because, well, they have some really great examples. So let's look at that word for a second. If it makes you uncomfortable, this talk is going to make you really uncomfortable. Have fun with that for a second. We're going to be talking about things like fat, and I'm going to use that term. Fat is absolutely a term that we're going to refer to characters. I will also use terms like obese and morbidly obese in relation to medical terminology only. However, here are some interesting terms that you might find for fat as per thesaurus.com. Do you want to see some interesting fun things on there? I highlighted the ones that I particularly enjoy. These are literally considered synonyms for the word fat in the dictionary. And what you're going to notice is that they have a lot of judgments that come associated with that. My particular favorite is elephantine rather. So you're seeing a lot of associations of things that are judgment-based. You're seeing things like gross, bulging, roly-poly. But my point being that these words are not the actual word fat. It's not actually talking about what it is. It's talking about the judgments that come with being fat. And that's a huge part of what we're going to be talking about and what gets imported into games today. We're talking about fat shaming in our society. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of a breakdown of what fat shaming is and how it affects pretty much everyone in our world today. Fat shaming is across the board a prejudice that exists against overweight people, especially those considered medically to be obese or morbidly obese. However, this issue of fat shaming and body shaming in general based on fat affects every single person that consumes media today and affects the manner by which people look at themselves and the judgments that they have based upon their physical appearance. However, it is considered a sliding scale. The heavier you are, the more this affects you and the more that you actually get the judgments going down the line. This is studies that are actually being done about the treatments of people today. The overweight face unequal treatment at work, in social situations, in education, when dealing with medical professionals, and the law. These are actual studies that talk about how people make less money, how they are treated by their teachers and educators and peers, and how they don't get treated the same way in courtrooms or in businesses. People have no qualms aiming cruelty, erasure, or shame at people who are overweight because there's very little outcry in society today about the unfair treatment of people who are overweight. You hear the basic stuff, which is, oh, you shouldn't do that. But there's still this undercurrent of acceptance that fat or overweight equals wrong and bad and gross, just like those thesaurus synonyms that we saw. The fat shaming culture is directly linked then, and this is like, there are many studies that I could have linked to this, to issues of eating disorder, lower self-esteem, distorted body images, depression, countless medical association-like problems that come with depression and mental illness triggering, just based on the treatment that you receive if you are overweight. So here are some quotes that I pulled out, basically. The top one is actually from the Food Policy and Obesity Center at Yale University, Red Center. And they did some wonderful studies about what it's like to be treated differently. And this is where we're going to talk about games and the actions that you can take in games and why fat shaming actually impacts games so much. So thinness has come to symbolize important values in our society, values such as discipline, hard work, ambition, and willpower. If you're not thin, you don't have them. This is a major deal because when you're talking about the manner by which we treat people and what we think about them in society, if you are associated with something other than these things that we associate with thinness or body normativity, then you're going to be lumped into this other category that has those thesaurus things attached to it. Lillian Bussell is a wonderful advocate for body diversity in the burlesque scene. She does a wonderful TED Talk about all of this stuff. But she quotes this wonderful sentence that I like, which is, too many people, both men and women, fat is the worst thing you could be. Society has turned the word fat into a synonym for ugly. I would also posit that it turns it into a synonym for things like inept, slovenly, lazy, greedy, all of these things that we like to put on top of the word fat. We might think that this might be a new thing, that body normativity issues are a new thing. However, this is Benjamin Franklin, who apparently also had a weight issue. He got old and then said, well, I guess I don't mind so much mind being old as I mind being fat and old. But let's talk about what we see in our media and what we are expected to accept. Here are some quotes from some people who are from Hollywood, which went out over Twitter, over other places, and they received some rather wonderful flashback for it. Jimmy Fallon, who everybody seems to love, is this adorable little Muppet on television. But he said, "Thank you, fat dude with the giant headphones on the subway, for looking like what would have happened if Jabba the Hutt mated with Princess Leia." This is comments that come out of Hollywood all the time. Kelly Clarkson got it recently. Here's another one which I really love from Emily Levine, which talks actually about a stigma that people who are overweight have to deal with, which is that they are unhealthy and that they are a drain on the medical resources in the community. And she says obesity is a drain on the economy. We have to pay for the health care of fat people who are usually poor and can't afford insurance. Obesity is well bad. So there are all of these assumptions that get tacked on top of a body type, talking about now it's an economic status. How do you know any of these things? Well, you must be poor because you're not taking care of yourself. You're not going to Whole Foods and eating quinoa. But like, there's all these weird things that people stick on top of the idea of being fat. My absolute favorite of all of them was this one, which is Elizabeth Hurley from Austin Powers, who said, I'd kill myself if I was as fat as Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe, who is considered the beauty of Hollywood. Are you kidding? Oh no!
I think it's just like a cord jiggling thing.
Oh please.
Oh look, cord. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Wait.
Yeah.
Be good. All right. So Marilyn Monroe being like the darling of Hollywood, right? She's considered beautiful by so many people, but this is the way and the warped way that like body normativity issues have changed the way that we look at ourselves and the way that we criticize others. So again, fat shaming is everywhere. It's considered one of the last acceptable prejudices. This is a quote that came from the website. I'm sort of a little weird about that statement myself. But it pervades every culture that are devoted to, even those, and especially in certain places that are devoted to inclusivity, intersectionality, and safe space creation, because it is a topic that is not discussed. It is so ingrained into our society to treat fat as different that even in spaces that are considered safe, there are issues about this not being addressed. And so shaming is considered an acceptable practice, oftentimes to try to drive people to feel better, that they should reach out and become healthier and rejoin normal society. So it is something that happens pervasively across the board. So that's a lot of information to talk about a pretty heinous thing that's going on in our society. But let's talk about what that means when we're talking about video games. There's been reams of paper talking about the representation of women, of different groups within video games, but there's not a hell of a lot of research about overweight characters or obese characters in the video game sphere. But there has been research about the discussions of how people emote into their avatars, how they feel about their avatars in games, and how they act based upon the appearance of avatars in games. So Nick Yee, who did quite a bit of research about how people feel about their avatars, and he then worked at Ubisoft. He came up with something that I found really interesting, which is called the Proteus effect, and it's the phenomenon where people will change their in-game behavior based upon how they think others expect them to behave, and this is specifically largely based on their appearance and the expectations of those appearance characters. He talks about the fact that players will actually, players themselves who are of higher body mass will create characters that are more idealized, so that they can feel more comfortable to operate in a manner that is acceptable or normative by being the hero, being active, and people who have are depressed or have low self-esteem will also do the same thing, so that they can enter into this normative sphere to compete and act on the same level as others. The interesting part about this discussion about it is that an audience doesn't even have to be present to enforce this. People will automatically do this in the study that he did to actually create, because they're so ingrained with this notion of what normative bodies can do in a game and what normative bodies can do in the world. A fat character would be less likely to do this or be treated this way, and it doesn't even need any longer to be reinforced by other people watching. It is inside people's heads already when they're creating these characters. So that alone tells us that we've gotten into this really weird snake eating the tail situation where our expectations of what fat should be and all the things that fat people can do is now enforcing what we bring into the game space with us for our representation. And on the other side of it, media then, of course, we do know influences a great deal about the way that we talk about things, the way that we look at things. And so now the games that we're creating and then are then being emulated back at us with this image of what of fat characters should be, shouldn't be. So there's a wonderful study, this is again brought up by Lillian Bussell, and she found it, and it's a mouthful. Visual diet versus associative learning as mechanisms of change in body size preference. Basically, that whole thing means is the visual diet that we take in, what we see every day, what we are inundated with from other people, with the media that we take in, the very images that we take in, make an impact on the preferences that we have in our lives and the things that we find acceptable and preferential, what we consider normal. The pictures we consume in the media all around us literally impact what we consider okay. And it changes over time. And they did studies where they presented pictures of women, like just from the body down. And over time, they were inundated with bodies that were larger over time. And it changed the way that they looked at bodies that were larger in general. So they came back and said, no, I prefer this now. This is okay. This is less unusual to us. So this study has some really interesting things to say about how the media can that you take in literally can change the perception of fat characters or people who are overweight in the world. Now here is where things get interesting. When looking at the video games the video game characters that we do see, however, there's not that many options even to see fat characters in the first place. So doing research about this has been really difficult. There are not that many studies. And you can literally only find, I think it's under 50 characters that are really significant representations of fat characters in games. And I've been doing this research for on and off for about a year now. And I'd love any resources that people have because it's really hard to find. And again, these expectations that we have about what a fat person can or should not be able to do impacts directly the roles that they have within the games that we consume, because games are built around two things, right, which is well, many things, but the narrative place of a character, but also the mechanics that they can do in a game. Those expectations of what we bring into the game sphere about what are the acceptable actions or believable actions for a fat character then will shape what they are given to do in a game. So what are the tropes? And we see a lot of these tropes coming out of Hollywood, and they're very mirrored. I mean, anybody who's watched television and movies will actually see this pretty straight out. So we're going to talk about them in terms of gender, only in the terms of the fact that there is a very serious difference in the way that that fat characters are treated by a gender. There is serious problems for both genders. However, it is incredibly disproportionately towards women in video games, and that's because, well, there's a lot of issues about how women are represented in video games, but that's a whole other talk. But we're going to start with men because I actually managed to find a couple of really good examples. So this is from an article on Destructoid, which is basically tropes versus fat men. They did research and they found 28 characters that they managed to actually break down and look at the comparisons thereof. So what are these characters trope-wise? They are normally the comic relief in any, oh boy, 5 minutes. They are normally the comic relief in any of these games. They are normally obsessed with food, or food is a large part of their storyline. They are non-playable. There is practically no playable fat characters, and there's one exception that I'm going to show you in a minute. They are usually, a lot of them are evil or considered very complex, and it's associated with their slovenliness or their grotesqueness. They are usually almost never love interests. There's one or two of them. And they are usually considered stupid, immature, inept, or bumbling. This also ties into the comic relief section, but finding somebody that's actually capable is very difficult. Here are the 28. If you can see the little red dots, that's basically saying where they fall into on the spectrum, and each of them will fall into at least one, if not more, of these categories. They're also often associated with being non-human. That's like non-human characters, they're animals or whatever. But that doesn't really affect this as much. But they usually are also depicted as grotesque in some way. The music, the aesthetic, all of it will aim towards a grotesquerie that makes their characters unusual and different. I'm going to try to put these up online so you can see them better another time. So here's one of the characters I'm going to use as an example, because he's actually kind of cool. So he's a fighting game character named Bob, and Bob is from Tekken 6. And he is a fighting character who retired from martial arts because nobody believed that a skinny, scrawny guy who was a martial arts master could do anything, so he comes back overweight and he says, no, I can do it. In the narrative of the game, nobody believes him. Nobody believes that an overweight character can do it, but he turns out actually in the game to be one of the fastest, hardest hitting mechanical characters in the game. And his whole story is around his weight. So I'm going to play a video really quick. Ridiculous, right? He's incredible. So I've actually played this game. It's awesome fun to play as Bob, right? But so there's a story mode to Tekken though. And so when you actually get to the end of the story mode, here's what happens to Bob. I don't know if you can hear it, girl.
Bob became a worldwide sensation. And his schedule was filled with a series of television.
Notice how he's framed. Everything has the word fat in it, no matter what you do. No matter what. My next is this favorite, like fat hero. But wait, it gets better.
Oh.
So all that fighting, and Bob has lost all the weight.
It can't be right. How can I only be 150 pounds?
Bob is actually super unhappy that he's overweight, but that he's no longer overweight, because his whole identity had been built around this thing. Now, what's interesting meta-wise is that he makes an interesting character, right? He was happy the way that he was. But the story itself, when he wins the game, he gets skinny. And in the next game, which is the tag team game, he's now Slim Bob. And this is how he's represented. He still goes around saying, I'm practically skin and bones and I'm miserable about the whole thing. But the whole story is now that he is the better fighter, he's skinny, and there's a story about how people treat him differently because now women like him. This is the best representation I could come up with of a character you can play in the game. Then there's a great one that I came across called Man Boobs Are Candy Corn. This is on the worst end of the scale, right? This is actually I can't pronounce that, Ouya? Yeah? And the game literally goes like this. I am so fat that my man boobs are candy corn. Help me to run and lose weight and reverse the effects of my candy corn weight, whatever. And yeah, it's just gross. This is what you have to look at, right? Awesome. How about women? It's even worse. So I'm going to speed through this really quickly. In the case of women in video games, you're going to find very little of overweight women. There are a few examples. I'm going to go through them extremely quickly. The first one being a very, very popular game which everybody really enjoyed, which is called Fat Princess. It's a really great sort of tower defense action, strategic game where you have a princess and she was kidnapped and she's in another tower, and it's a capture the flag. You have to go get her back. The other team, however, is going to try to keep you from doing that by feeding her cake so that she gets fatter and you can't carry her away. And the entire little guy's job is to sit there going, as they try to carry this fat princess back to their base. They really decided to double down on how gross they were going to be about the titles when the DLC pack was called Fat Rolls, and it was all about giving them new candy that they could feed the princess. This game is really fun. The mechanics are wonderful. The content is absolutely disgusting when it comes to representation of women. This was the only game that I could find where you could play a fat woman. And this is I can't pronounce it, I'm so sorry, I just call it Love Revo. And it's basically a game it's a visual novel and dating sim about a girl who is a young model who then gained weight because she loves sweets and ate too much. And she didn't really care that she gained weight so much, but when all of her friends and her boyfriend reject her, she goes on this binge with her doctor to become skinny no matter what. And the way you win the game is by winning back friends and their affection based upon your appearance. Yeah. This is the only one I found that you can play the character.
I should have killed your fat ass when I had the chance!
Sorry, what was that?
I'm going to skip over really quick because it's a longer video. Ellie is considered one of the better representations of women. She is considered an empowered character that actually has a deeper backstory and an association with the game's lore. She, however, is not playable. She's just a quest giver. She's not very much in the game. And she's considered comic relief and fits into many of the tropes that we talked about before. She is considered, however, a fan favorite, like I said, and a go-to for overweight cosplayers, actually, who feel empowered by her representation in the game. Then there's another one named Amanda Waller, and this is a favorite of mine because Amanda Waller is an example of the disappearance and literal erasure of fat women, both in comic books, television, and now in video games. Amanda Waller started out as one of the big bad guys of the DC universe and Batman and Suicide Squad comic books, but when the New 52 came out, she was literally shrunk down into a different character, and done in the same thing from the Smallville television series, where Pam Grier played her to amazing reviews, to now where she is on Arrow, and there's a significant difference, right? Well, now she gets to be pretty badass in the new Arkham series, but you'll also notice something that's missing with her. She is considered one of the more...
Sooner or later.
I'll finish my statement. She's considered one of the more capable characters, the deep characters, the ones that make large impacts on the story. But you'll notice she only goes so far into what she looked like before and previously in her representation. She's still overweight, and it's kind of still one of the only representations, but she's certainly not playable as a character. So what does that tell us about the place of overweight people in games? It's that they are not playable. I'm going to zoom through this, promise. So why are fat characters not a priority? This is a statement that came from Drew Murray, who is the game director of Sunset Overdrive. Now, Sunset Overdrive is all about wearing all kinds of awesome, crazy things in a crazy comedy future. And they discussed why, putting beards on characters of all genders was really important. But this is one of the quotes that got me, was that they were saying that they were focusing more on doing other things with the characters rather than we wanted to put our time into wild outfits instead of technology to bloat up people or bloat them down. Clearly, the idea of wearing buckets on your head was more important than having representation of people who are overweight in your game. But they did have time to poke fun at the Assassin's Creed controversy about them not being able to create women in Assassin's Creed when they created this character as part of their promotional stuff. And then later said, I think it's really important because we don't really have the time to do all the stuff in the game, and creating bigger characters is actually really hard because it makes engineering the models hard. And I was like, isn't that kind of what they said about Assassin's Creed? But you sort of had the time to make the joke, didn't you? So the fact of the matter is there's body diversity for a lot of different kinds of characters, and you start to see it in games like Team Fortress 2. There are places where these things are appearing, but funny how you never see it for women, and you're never going to see that many fat men either, especially not the Heavy is actually one of the characters that is probably one of the best representations. There's also apparently Overwatch is trying to do some work about this. And there's a guy back there that the internet has named Fat Bane, because they haven't called him anything yet, but we're wondering what his deal is, and so there seems to be a little bit of movement forward. But the fact of the matter is, what happens if all that you see in the media that you're consuming and in the games that you're playing is either ridicule or erasure and nothing at all? Representation matters, but not just any representation. It can't just all be Ellies, and it certainly can't just all be fat princesses, because you're going to start taking in the verbs that these characters can do and are allowed to represent in these games as the only representation that you see, and you start to internalize that as per the study that we talked about before. Now here's something that I'm going to put my foot down and say very strongly. True diversity in games cannot be achieved by erasing fat bodies, and it cannot be truly achieved until we address this issue in a manner that is not shaming. That is the heart of what I'm talking about, and the reason that I speak about these things is because we are not discussing this issue, because of how uncomfortable it makes people, because of what it brings up about our society, and how it really is kind of one of the last frontiers of acceptable prejudice in this world. So if we're going to talk about it, we have to talk about it for real, and about what it says about us, and what it says about the players and our interaction with the games. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all of our speakers here. We don't have a huge amount of time for Q&A, but I'd love to get just a few questions in. I'm sure you guys have a bunch of questions you'd like to ask.
Here?
Yeah.
This isn't so much a question as a follow-up. If you have access to the GDC Vault for this year, one of the animators from the people who made Sunset Overdrive gave the most disappointing talk in history about how they made their, quote, body types for that game. If you find somebody who has a Vault, log in and watch it, because it's sad. It's real sad, and it totally follows on what you said, that they had time to mock Ubisoft, but they didn't have time to make diverse body types.
The fact is it wasn't a priority for them. They just, it's clear that it wasn't a priority for them.
Well, the hilarious thing about the talk is that they started with like 3 body types that were diverse, and then they were like, no, this is really hard, and then they cut it down to 2 each. The worst.
Yeah. Just a question that Haley, you didn't comment on. I know that Uncharted 3 in the multiplayer mode has quote-unquote donut versions of the characters.
Yes.
It's a sort of derogatory term, but how does that representation work? I haven't played it.
I have not either, but I've heard about it, and the fact that, so the representation alone that it's called a donut character is sort of or you're going to hear about skins of characters that are called fat or the bloated characters or stuff like the fact that they're calling him Fat Bane on Reddit alone is saying that like this is a thing that is not normative. This is not normal and this is outside of the normal. So I feel really uncomfortable about that. The same way that I felt uncomfortable when I played one of the Resident Evil games and they were just like there was the African American woman character and she was then like in one of the special outfits she got. She was in a jungle princess outfit. It's uncomfortable because you're relying on these incredibly offensive stereotypes either in words or in the way that you're presenting these characters. I'm not making, by the way, an equal issue thing here when I'm saying that, but what I'm saying is it bothers me in a lot of the same ways because you are making exception out of what should be the norm of a character and not relying on stereotypes. A person is just there.
What if there's three things about that? My understanding is that the character's appearance doesn't actually have anything to do with the gameplay, though. So I don't actually know from the
I don't know what their aim was, and I find it just, why couldn't that character just be, I don't know, the character? Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, I have a question for Sandy. It's just about how is it possible to for all AAA developers to kind of give them the idea that they should use a lot of female characters when they are designed to easily pass off games that don't do well as failures. I know notable ones that have female protagonists that were seen as failures were Heavenly Sword. You mentioned Remember Me in your talk, but that was considered like a financial flop for various reasons. And even Tomb Raider, when it initially came out, they considered it a financial failure because it didn't make the amount of sales or money that they wanted from it. So when they paint the narrative to show that these games don't work, how can do you have any suggestions to possibly like start changing their minds?
That's why I said it's hard to say because of the, it was Tomb Raider. Probably after that they have put the marketing dollars into it, but so much of it does matter on marketing. Even in the mobile game space, if you don't have good marketing, your game's not going to do well. The only way I could say is like something like a company like Naughty Dog to be able to willing to take those risks and try it is a statement in itself that perhaps it doesn't have to be the assumption that already you're expecting failure, and that's why you don't put marketing dollars into it because why would you put marketing dollars into something that probably is not going to sell, right? You would rather try to convince the developer to change the gender. And at the same time, I would say that in the casual game space, there are probably developers that were convinced to change the gender to female because they were convinced that would increase the dollars amount. But the casual game stuff is over. We've moved on to mobile, out of social games. I really see the solution being in terms of the indie sector and for creative game makers to start either making their own personal stories or to try to make stories that would, exist in concert or in opposition to what you would see from mainstream.
All right, 2 more questions. Quick.
Oh, sorry. I don't know if you have ever think of the difference between acceptance of like girl children versus like adult women. So like The Walking Dead, Clementine is like this prepubescent, and it's like a really popular game, and she's the main character, and like significantly more mature than everyone else in the entire game. And like The Last of Us, she's like 15 or 16, and like when I went to GDC last year, that game got nominated for like a ton of awards, but they're not adults. So I was wondering if you had looked into that, like people are more willing to accept a young teenager, prepubescent girl child as a main character versus someone who is like Tomb Raider's age, or like, because a lot of women characters also aren't really older than like their mid-20s, early 30s.
Right. I haven't looked into that specifically, and it may be true that since we are used to, we have games that we play children, so, and we don't, I don't think there's a, specificity in terms of, you don't play girl child or boy child. Stories are usually just generally about children.
I would add to that you also got to think about
the historical aspect of how adulthood and childhood have been seen linked to games. So that was actually not always the case. So there was a time, and this has to do a lot with child labor too. There was a time when children were also considered more like small adults. So the idea of leisure and how that tied into your free time as a child has changed. I'm not quite sure. I can't say for sure that is a reason, but I feel like there are a lot of systematical links in the way we think about games and the way we consume them that have to do with that history and how we envision if game is a leisurely thing and how that relates to production or not. So at the same time, with women it gets more complicated because then you mix in sexuality and when they become production of babies and that changes, which is horrible, right? But then that changes the role of the woman as a gender thing or not. A thing, and I mean a thing, literally.
And it would be hard to say that the child would be a sex object, or I don't know if I would want to play that game.
Yeah.
Well,
Exactly.
Can I also add
Which
that-
is why they don't, right? Yeah.
One of the interesting controversies that came up in the last few years was about Tomb Raider and some of the statements that were made by the creator about the instinct of making Lara Croft look younger. And the reason that he attributed to that was that he wanted to see that the player was going to feel protective towards her. And I think that's a really big issue about making female characters younger, is because that creates the instinct of protection of your avatar, of that association that strips away the sexuality and the questions of agency of women, and instead turns that character into an infantilized creature that you then have to feel the sort of overarching adult feelings towards. And I think it completely changes the manner by which you're going to feel towards them. Think about, Mirror's Edge or something else where you're standing in the space of a female character. You don't see them, but you're inside an adult female's body as opposed to a younger character.
All right, unfortunately, we're running out of time. This is a great discussion, but I'm going to have to cut you off because the closing remarks are in like 5 minutes. So, great talk, everyone. Let's give another hand.
Everybody could make their way to the main space. We're going to do a little closing ceremony.